about this stuff, right? So essentially for me, and some of you might know bits and pieces of this anyway, but I can sort of tell you a bit more about, the different places that I worked, the institutions I've been a part of, and like where I've had some of these learnings for what founders need to do, how they can transition into becoming CEOs, and what is the role of a founder versus CEO as well. So, and because that's something that can help you, both like in terms of understanding that, but also setting up that right mindset. So, just a bit of background on me. I am an engineer by training originally, that come from Pakistan. I worked in Pakistan in sort of engineering, in agriculture, and Berkeley Ag Tech. Worked in Pakistan in oil and gas. Then when I came here to Australia, I did a master's in engineering management from Wollongong Uni. I also was involved in, I guess, sort of research stuff. So I did a half PhD in climate and energy policy. I decided I didn't want to write a full thesis because it was boring and long and no one's going to read it. So I gave up on that, and then so kind of like a dropout from that perspective, and then applied for a bunch of jobs, wasn't very successful, decided I wanted to start a startup, and went through different iterations of different ideas. My sort of first idea was a renewable energy clean tech startup, because that was my, I guess, background, because of engineering, and then really quickly realized how saturated that space was. This was back in 2014, 2015. And then basically gave away some of the ideas to other people. Then I got to this point of, well, I want to start something, but I don't really know what, and got amazing advice from a bunch of mentors through a social enterprise incubator program called Schools for Social Entrepreneurs, to basically try and solve a problem that I faced. For me, it was this issue of unemployment, particularly underemployment faced by many immigrants and refugees in Australia, but also, immigrants and refugees who wanted to, start their own business. And so I wanted to sort of focus on that. And that's, I guess, the sort of genesis and story behind Catalysr. After starting Catalysr, back in 2016, I've also been involved in many other organizations. So this is the part of the story you might not know. So for example, I've worked with setting up a clean tech accelerator program called Energy Lab. Was involved with the Foundation for Young Australians and did some consulting work with them. Have done programs at Singularity University and NASA to learn about like some of the space tech stuff. Again, this is my curiosity in engineering. And then I've been involved in many different foundations and not-for-profits and stuff like Westpac and AMP and so on. Have over the last couple of years been really interested in VC and investing, and probably impact investing. And so I was involved with Impact Investing Australia. Did a couple of programs on that as well, like VC Catalyst and StartMate and sort of Blackbird's First Believers program. And I've also been involved with the Australian government to invest into early stage startups through the Accelerating Commercialization grants. So the reason why I'm telling you all of that is not because I'm special or anything, but just because I feel like I've had many experiences working with founders and working with CEOs from I guess across the spectrum, within Australia, within the US, within other countries, and sort of like the sort of concepts and things that I'm talking about. Part of them might feel theoretical, but other things that like are very practical based on what I've seen and what founders do and what CEOs do really well. So I guess with that preamble, the other thing that I want to mention is that for you, when you're starting a startup, right, and when you're a founder, really fundamentally what you're doing is you're solving a problem. I think many of you sort of recognize that like you're not just creating a solution, not just creating a new kind of technology, but you're actually solving a problem. So as long as you're focused on that, that's a really good starting point. This is a special, I guess, call out to the engineers in the room like me, because we love technology and we love to build solutions and not think too much about the problem. But what I would say is, as a founder, the biggest, I guess, first role you have is to focus on finding the right problem, finding, I guess, people or potential customers who have that problem, and then try and understand that problem well before you go about solving it. So I might have mentioned this to some of you previously, but there are some really fantastic resources that you as founders at that early stage can go and have a look at. So things like, well, there are two books that I love on this. One is called Talking to Humans, which is all about that customer discovery process. And I can sort of give these resources to you afterwards, and this is recorded so you don't have to remember it. So Talking to Humans by Gift Constable, which is all about the customer discovery process. And second one is Testing with Humans, which is also about testing and prototyping as well. There's a fantastic book by Google Ventures called Sprint, which is about design sprints and again, testing your ideas, prototyping those ideas and doing stuff. So once you figure out what problem you want to solve, the next step for you is to actually go out there and try and create a solution and solve it, right? So many of you are kind of at this stage where we've developed what we call an MVP, or a minimum viable product, which is something that works for your customers. It's not necessarily your final solution that will wow them, or that's something that you'll get paid lots of money for, but it's something that is essentially operational, and that is something that your customers can use and test and give you feedback. So that's where many of you are, as I guess part of the program. Some might be a bit further along, some might be a bit further back, but this is the stage where as a founder, what I would recommend is you basically have two roles, right? So role number one is to focus on your customers, and role number two is building your product. It might seem sexy and exciting to do everything else, but really what it comes down to is if you can do these two things, then you can be a successful founder. It's just focus on your customers and just build product. Because oftentimes, Shelby, you mentioned this earlier, that as founders, when you're starting a company, there's a million things you have to do. There's a lot of fires burning that you feel like you want to work on. And some of those things are important and urgent. Some of those things are urgent but not important, the whole matrix. But what you've got to, I guess, learn as a founder is to let go and know that you can't do everything. And so, in the short term, if you're just a solo founder on your own, just focus on understanding your customers and building your product, right? Don't worry too much about everything else, all the bells and whistles. Yes, you have to do things legally. Yes, you have to make sure that you set up bank accounts and like basic processes. So don't go to, without insurance and things like that. But, don't waste time on like conferences. Don't waste time on a lot of other stuff that might not be as relevant to you. So whatever you're doing, make sure that it either helps you understand your customers or access your customers, or it helps you get some insight on how to build your product and how you solve that problem. And if you're not doing that, you're not really I guess sort of focusing your time appropriately as a founder. The other thing to keep in mind is that when you're an early stage founder, what you are doing is in that sort of company building phase is really you're being really creative, and you're focusing on just coming up with multiple different options of trying to birth this new idea or new solution into the world, which is solving a particular problem, right? So this is the time when you can be really creative. You can basically do anything because you haven't really created anything yet. So this is a great time for you to sort of, I guess, utilize that creative mindset and that thinking, and have fun, right? Like also play with ideas, test different things. Don't be limited by what conventional wisdom is. And oftentimes we see that the sort of startups that are successful in some industries don't have anyone, who's sort of come from that industry, and they're sort of outsiders. And the reason why is because they can sometimes see the problems well, or they're not necessarily, they're basically fools to to that particular issues or particular things, and so they want to give things a crack anyway. And then when things work, then everyone else sort of joins the bandwagon. So knowing that is really important. That your goal is to be focus on being creative, coming up with many ideas as possible, testing those ideas and validating them. Because as a founder as well, you can think about yourself as basically a scientist and a detective all in one. So as a scientist, because you're going out there and, kind of like other good scientists, you have a hypothesis of you believe in something, or you've got certain assumptions about the world, about certain problems, about certain people or target customers. And then you're going out there and you're testing those ideas and then seeing whether they're right or not, right? And so there's a process you can follow to do that. If for those of you who really love process, one of the best books that I found on entrepreneurship in terms of process is called Disciplined Entrepreneurship. It's by a guy called Bill Olet out of MIT. And it's fantastic because it has a 24-step process that he talks about of, what are the different things you need to do. So oftentimes people will tell you, ask you, what is your value proposition, right? Or, can you tell us about, how much your pricing is, or whatever different things are there. And as a founder, you don't really know how to create those things. But this book is really fantastic because it goes down to that granular level, helps you break that down. So if you're a founder, if you're getting stuck somewhere in the early days, that's a good book to go to because that can help you answer some of those basic questions. So, okay, great. You've started a company. You've gone out there. You've tried and validated a problem, which some of you might have done. You might have even started creating a product. the next thing to do, I guess, on the journey of building a company is to build a team. Now, you can build a team in multiple ways. You can either start with being a co-founder, or you can start to have other team members as well. Now, what's important in getting a co-founder, and again, this sounds like a bit of a cliche, but co-founder relationships oftentimes last longer than marriages. So we've sort of seen, and like there's sort of stats and data around this, that you can sort of almost treat it as a marriage, because like it is a real serious commitment to whoever you're joining. Either they're joining your team or you're joining someone else's team. So you can also think about that from that perspective, right? Oftentimes people have a question on, well, how do I actually go out and find co-founders? And there could be tech co-founders or like business co-founders. And I guess the response is ideally you would know that person in your life through various different life situations. So you might have gone to uni with them, you might have worked together in a company with them, or some other sort of places where you've actually seen them work. Ideally seen them work under pressure. If you haven't seen that, or if you don't have that background, then the next best thing is, if you're going and doing co-founder dating or meeting new people, then really is to have a bit of a temporary relationship, right? So try and do some things, try and build a cool product, try and go to a hackathon, try and go to like a hiking trip or something like that, or like camping somewhere. Do things that would put you and your potential co-founder out of the comfort zone, and see how you will react to it, right? The biggest thing that we see in startups that are successful is resilience and grit. So if you want to have co-founders, having grit and having resilience is really important. And then also seeing how you'll deal under pressure, how you can work with each other. I think those are the key things that you have to look at. For some of you, this is like basic stuff. For others, this might be new information. So I just want to make sure that, like we've got different experiences and skills in the room. Now, the goal with when you've got co-founding team is to, you could have like one co-founder or two co-founders or however many. There's a limit to how many people you should have as co-founders. I would say like the upper limit, probably like 5-6 people. Don't go for a co-founding team that's bigger than that, because then it's just too many chefs in the kitchen. It's really hard to make decisions. And the only thing that separates this early stage startup from like a big company which has a lot of resources is the agility and the speed at which you can move and do things. So if you've got a large team, it really slows you down in decision making, in doing the work, in the early days, especially because you have to be creative, you have to be nimble, you have to try new things. So a good way to think about it is every single team member that you add, it will exponentially increase the complexity in your organization, because you have to communicate with that extra person. Everyone has to communicate extra. Everyone has to make sure that no one has any misunderstandings. Everyone has to understand everyone's trained. They know what each other's doing. There's all sorts of those things, right? And the early stage of your startup, when you don't have a product, you don't understand those things, that it doesn't really work. So oftentimes what a good deal is to have 1 to 2 maybe co-founders in a startup, and then work with them to try and understand your customers, try to build your basic MVP or product, and then try and sell it to your potential customers. Once you've started selling it, there's a sort of point at which we say you've found a product market fit. So this is a point where your customers are coming to you, and they're looking for your product. They're looking to, I guess, know from you, what they can do to actually get their hands on your product. And that's a great sign, because that means that what you've created isn't just something that you're pushing out in the world, but there's actually pulled from the market on the other end. And so that's a good point, because that's when you can actually look at expanding the team. So whenever you think about building a team, and sort of transitioning from being a founder to that CEO role, which is to have a team, that's the time to do it, right? Now, oftentimes what happens is, as early stage founders, startups don't fail because they are growing slowly or late. Oftentimes startups will fail because they grow really early. So this is a huge mistake that startups fail, which is they build a big team, spend a lot of money and resources, and then get disappointed when they don't get the results. Because the reason is that when you're trying to confuse the two different parts of building a company, so the early part, the sort of startup part, is really about creativity, really about solving problems. And then the second part, which is, I guess, company building, is all about growth and operations. And that's more of that analytical, brain. And that's a lot more structured. And so that's where you need to have specialists. That's what you need to have team. But in the sort of co-founding team, you need, if you've got someone with domain expertise, that's amazing. But other than that, really it's important that you have people who can do multiple jobs at once as sort of co-founders, because they can then help you, and you can all help each other to try and solve like whatever problems that are coming your way. And the quicker you solve those problems, the more likely you are to be successful. So your goal is to solve those problems quicker than basically problems come to your way. So if you can do that, and that could be cash flow problems, right? You don't have enough money, going and raising capital. That could be building a product. That could be solving customer queries, whatever those things are. As a sort of early founding team, that's what you're doing. You're listening to your customers, you're building product, and sort of doing that in a loop and iterating and making it better and better until you come to that product market fit point where the customers want what you have, because you've already got it to a certain, I guess, position. And then that's the time where you look at sort of growing your team, raising additional capital, and sort of going from there. And I guess on capital raising, I'll just say a couple of words, which is, like there's advice that VCs and different investors will give you to, build relationships with investors early, and then raise capital in some cases early as well, so you can build your product. It might work in some cases, but I would say building a relationship with investors is important early, but you shouldn't raise capital early. If you can bootstrap your startup, you should, because that means that you can basically raise capital at a high valuation. You can raise capital at a point where you basically have a you don't have to give as much away, both in terms of control as well as equity, and you get to not dictate the deal, but basically set the right sort of terms for the deal. So if you can bootstrap, if you can build a product, if you can get some traction and some customers early on with your own money or your own resources, it is beneficial in terms of your longevity of your business. The other thing to keep in mind is that it also helps you understand how you can save money and use money appropriately, because if you raise capital too early, it's not your money, right? Like you can decide to just spend it whatever, but if you're using your own money, you're normally more careful and more resourceful with that. So it also helps you with that creativity as well. So that's another way, or another reason why I would recommend doing bootstrapping in the early days. But anyway, that's a sort of an additional topic. So once you've got that product market fit, which basically means that customers are not only buying your product, but they're also recommending it to other people, and you're getting these inquiries and external people are coming and asking you for it. And product market fit will mean different things for different people, different industries as well. For example, for enterprise or B2B customers, like product market fit might be different. For like a B2C company, it might be different. So for enterprise, for example, it could mean things like you having longer term contracts with some of the big clients could show that you've got some sort of product market fit, and then you can use them and leverage those sort of case studies and contracts to then go and get other contracts and things like that. But in sort of B2C, it's different, where it could be like user growth, or, you've made some initial sales, etc. And then that's sort of growing really rapidly and not sort of tapering off. So yeah, it depends on what that looks like for you. But that's really the time when I would say is a good time for you to sort of go and both raise capital, but also build a team. Now, once you're starting and building a team, this could be anywhere between 5 to 20 people, like the initial team that you're building. That's a time when I would say you should think about yourself as a CEO. Before that, you're thinking about yourself as a founder. And so your role as a founder, as I said, was really going and being creative, being collaborative, trying to do whatever needs to get done, but focus on your product and your customers. Now, once you've got a bit of a team around you and you have already got some early customers, some early traction, that's the time to sort of move into that CEO role. And for the CEO role, essentially what you do as a CEO, because you've got a team now, is you don't do the actual doing of the work. And that's, I guess, what sort of differentiates you from a founder. What you do is you are the architect of culture within your company. You're the hub of information, so people are coming to you oftentimes for decision making, and you can delegate a bunch of decisions, obviously. And then also, you set up the culture, you try and inspire the team, and you also, try and make sure that you're setting goals for the business, obviously in consultation with your team, and you're setting up that vision and that mission and all those kind of things, right? So really is your job as CEO is to make sure that your team does really well. Your job as a founder is to make sure that you, and obviously your sort of founding team does a fantastic job, but your job as a CEO is not to do the job, it's to help other people do the job, right? So it's really important to differentiate between those two, I guess, states. And the only reason you can get to that point, or the only way you can get to that point, is if you've had that initial success of understanding your customers, building the product for them, and also solving their problem. And then getting enough revenue for you to build a team, or raising capital to build a team, and then going to the next stage. So hopefully that is a bit clearer now in terms of the distinction between, when are you a founder versus when are you a CEO. And this is obviously my personal opinion. I'm not saying this is like the right thing. This is just based on what I've seen. So now that you're a CEO, I'm sort of project yourself into the future. You're already, say, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years from out of Catalysr. You've already done some of this work. You've got a product in the market. You've already started hiring people. Now, to inspire your team and to continue to work with your team, there's some key things that you should be doing, which, I guess are sort of individual habits that I want to talk about that you should be doing to optimize yourself. So the things that you can do that can improve, I guess, or help you be a better CEO. And there's a fantastic book on this as well, which is called The Great CEO Within. It's by a guy called Matt Mockery, and I can, again, give you all these sort of resources and links if you want on Slack. So don't worry if you miss something. And one of the key things that I'll, I guess, mention there is that you start with getting things done. So as a founder, this is very important, but as a CEO, it's even more important, is to make sure that you set a system where you're ensuring that you've got a system through which you are not only doing things, but you're also ensuring that you are that nothing's sort of falling through the cracks, right? So again, going back to Shelby's point around, you are juggling all the different balls in the air. When you're starting out, it's fine to ignore some of those things because you can, you're not really a company, you're just an idea or an early stage startup. But as you're sort of building your company, and as you're building a team, you can't afford to, not pay tax. You can't afford to, have like any big regulation issues. You can't afford to not have a board. All these kind of different things that you would need. And so it's really important to know that you will have to deal with all of those things, and you've got to have a system for yourself to manage that. Now, different people have different systems, and getting things done. There's a fantastic book on that as well that you can go and have a look at, of like how do you become more productive and efficient. So there's a lot out there in this space. So there's no way I can sort of summarize that. I'm sure that many of you have already looked at that, of like how do you sort of become more productive and more efficient with your time. I have a blog piece that I wrote about this a couple of years ago, and I can share that with you as well if you want, like how I try to be productive personally. But that's a system that I've developed and that sort of keeps changing. Another thing to keep in mind is that the more, I guess, like when you become a CEO, you also have to really look at what are the key goals that you have, and what are the key decisions that you want to make and key things you want to do. Again, because you've got a team that is able to do most of the other things. And so you want to really focus on whatever that top goal is or top priority is that you're getting paid to, I guess, fix. So is that building a team? Is that building the right culture? Is that help making sure that the product reaches in the hands of customers and then, you get paid for it? All those, I guess, sort of key things that you need to do to ensure that the business is running properly. Those are the things you need to focus on. Everything else, basically, your team can take care of. So, for example, if a customer has a particular inquiry, you shouldn't be the one as a CEO to go out and try and respond to emails. As a founder, you should. As a CEO, you're not doing that, right? And the reason why you're sort of differentiating yourself and not doing those kind of things is because it helps you to just focus on what's the most important thing at hand. And it's really hard for founders who become CEOs to delineate or differentiate between those two roles, because as a founder, you're so used to doing everything. As a CEO, you also want to do the same thing, but you can't because there's a lot more stuff that you need to get done. Also, you've got a team who you've built, who are specialists, who you trust, who can do those things. So you also have to let go, right? Like you can't be constantly micromanaging them, or you can't be constantly doing everything. So that's, I guess, a thing that everyone has different ways of learning and experiencing, but that's something to keep in mind as well. The, I guess, other thing on that is making sure that you're present. And I know that, again, sounds really simple, but it's not. When you become a CEO, as a founder as well, but particularly when you become a CEO, it's so important to be present in every single situation. So whether that's a meeting with someone, whether that's whether that's like an email, whether that's a message or whatever, like it's really important to be actually present and thinking, because your decision not just affects you or your idea, it affects the whole company. It affects like your customers, affects a lot more people. So you've got to stop and think, and you've got to be a bit more reflective and a bit more present. And you can't just make decisions on the fly and just send quick messages and get done with it. That you might do when you're a founder because you're running late on stuff. So really, really important to do that. The other thing, I guess, on systems is try and build systems when you are at the CEO level. Have, if you can do it yourself, fantastic. Otherwise, having team members who can do that. So, great example of Catalysr was, we had Marlo who helped us as a head of operations really build a lot of systems. So, what you see at Catalysr is obviously, you can see Slack and you can see Zoom and things like that. But behind the scenes, there's like 4 or 5 different systems. Like there's FormStack, which helps collect all the information on the website. Then it automates all that information into like our Airtable, and like it sort of does Zapier, and there's like 5, 6 different integrations that happen. If you ask me to do it, I can't do it. I can't set it up. I just don't have that expertise or that patience to do it. But Marlo, as a sort of head of operations, was the kind of person who would do something like this. So in the early days of Catalysr, where we were working with 5 or 10 sort of teams a year, we can just do it all on Excel, and I would literally manually copy and paste from emails or send you like an individual email. Right now, there's no way we can do that. Now we'll just send everyone a message on Slack or those kind of like basic things in systems. So depending on whatever your startup is, you've got to also think about setting up those systems or bringing in the people who can help you set those systems up, because that really, really, really helps you in not just being efficient, but also in making sure that nothing falls through the cracks, because a lot of that stuff is automated and optimized. Then if you find yourself repeating advice, things like that a lot, another good advice that I've sort of been given and I've sort of implemented is write it down. Whether you write it personally, whether you develop a wiki or whatever that looks like, or a blog, oftentimes, like whether that's like a training manual or something like that, just write stuff down. Try to create some of these processes, particularly as a CEO, because it helps you, not having to repeat yourself like 10 times. And also because you can't, scale yourself. You can't be there directly. So if you have any systems, if you have these kind of wikis and things like that, that helps you do that. Then I don't know how people are going, by the way. I'm just going through a lot of content. So I just want to check in with people. Are you good? Do you have a question? Or do you want me to keep going? Good. Sorry, you wanted to say something?
No, I'm good.
Okay, awesome. So we are gonna do a breakout room in 5 minutes. So that's when you'll actually go and sort of reflect on some of these ideas as well. So if you are thinking about something specifically, or your situation or your startup, that's when I guess you can sort of go and explore that a bit further. So the next thing, as I guess as a CEO and generally founder, good human being, I think you should do, or I do personally, is gratitude. I think this is something that will be really important as you sort of not just build your company, but also build your team, because there's going to be a lot of setbacks, right? There's going to be great things that will happen, but there's also going to be lots and lots of problems and issues and things that will come up. Some of them are going to be really tiny things, some will be huge things. So it's really important to be grateful for what you have, be grateful for the opportunity, be grateful for the privilege. And being grateful, there's like a lot of science behind it that actually helps you feel not just more fulfilled, but also productive. And so some people do a great gratefulness journal. So they write down, what are they grateful for? Sometimes they do it before the day or after the day. I'm not that good at that personally. I try to do it every now and then, but it's hard. But what you can do is just appreciate people. So particularly as a CEO, your team, don't try and take credit for stuff. Try and give credit as much as possible to other people. Try and elevate people, because your job again is to build other people up and support them, and then also ensuring that you're saying thank you. So thank you again is something that many founders and CEOs don't say often enough, but really it's a really important thing to do. So someone has made an introduction to you for a customer, an investor that's spent some time with you, even if they're not investing in you, a mentor has given you their time, anything that's happened, it doesn't cost you anything other than like 2 minutes to say thank you, whether it's in an email or a text message or verbally, just saying that really helps. It doesn't just help you have a better relationship with them, but it also helps you personally feel a lot more grateful, and that helps with your own mental health and productivity and those kind of things as well. So the more you do that, the better, I guess, you've got to sort of think about that, and you'll probably be a bit more grounded as well as a founder, because the alternative sometimes we've seen in sort of startups is there, and I'm sure you've seen it as well, like the archetype of founders who are sometimes really like egoistic, or really like their idea is their baby, and therefore they're not just going to say thank you to anyone. They think they're better than other people, and so what, like, that's something that, like in the beginning you might get away with it, but in the long term, you're less likely to be successful if you are that kind of person. So just try to be grateful, because that definitely helps you. Then many of you would have heard of doing or basically managing time. So managing time as a founder is hard. Definitely managing time as a CEO is impossible. So don't manage time. And I know that sounds like a crazy, stupid advice, but I would say manage your energy. So be mindful that all of us are different. Different times of the day when we have energy, different situations where we have energy. Some of us are introverted, some of us are extroverted. Some like to do certain things, other people like to do other things. We're all different people, and so it's really important to understand yourself and just reflect on what are the things you do that give you energy, right? So oftentimes you can do a bit of an energy audit on, like, what are the things that you do, and like this is really simple, like 80-20 rule, right? So ideally, I mean, you obviously can't do 100% of the things that give you energy, because there's a lot of some boring stuff or other things that have to be taken care of, or things that might not give you energy. And so if you have that 80-20 rule, where 80% of the time you're doing things that give you energy, and maybe 20% of the time things that really suck, that you don't like doing, that's, I guess, it's a good start. And then the things that don't give you energy, obviously they need to get done too, because they're important. So that's where outsourcing comes in, or that's where working with other people come in. And so with the and this is again a classic example that I'll give you with, like, Marlo and I, and how we work together with Catalysr. Well, what gave me energy was being creative, coming up with ideas, coming up with programs, or talking to people and connecting with all of you. Whereas with Marlo, what gave her energy was building systems, building processes, doing operations, haggling subscriptions, and making sure that people are like giving us like different not-for-profit discounts or whatever, right? So those are the things that I would never be able to do because I don't just want to get into that kind of detail in that sort of context, because that just sucks a lot of energy out of me. So everyone will have stuff that they like doing. So when you're also building a team, as a sort of founder initially, but then also as a CEO, you look for those complementarity, not just in skill sets, but also in areas where like you basically have different people who have different kind of things that they like doing that gives them energy. So if you do that, that will not only make you more productive, but also will hopefully ensure that you don't burn out, because that's a huge thing that happens with many founders, where because you're working really hard, you're pushing yourself a lot, there's a big risk that you can burn out. And so what we don't want is to you to face that. And I'll come back to the health bit in a second. But then the other thing is also, on top of energy, there's also some things that you're uniquely good at, right? So some people are really good with numbers. Some people are really good with writing. Some people are, have got a specific kind of personality type that's really good at doing something. And so doesn't matter what your title is. If you've got someone in the team, like say you have a CTO, but that CTO is actually really good at storytelling and pitching, they should be the one pitching your startup, right? It's not like, yes, it's the CEO's job, but at the same time, if you've got a team member who's really, really good at something, and you would say, they're an expert in something, or they're whatever, then they should be the one doing that thing in your company, because they're utilizing their skills really well. If that means changing the title, do that. But in most of these cases, like for example, there might be a person who's really good at finance, but not good at leading people, not good at leading teams. But they oftentimes become a CEO. So the problem is they're sort of always in numbers and not really looking at how the team is doing, what the team morale is, and things like that. On the other hand, people might be really good at dealing with people, but have no understanding of the numbers, and sometimes they're not good CEOs either. So you've got to have a balance of these kind of different skill sets, right? Where you need to be a generalist in the sense that you understand enough about each portfolio in the business, or each part of the business. So how does HR work? How does finance work? How does marketing work? And you don't need to understand all the specifics and details. So for example, with Catalysr, I have no idea about the intricacies and specifics of how Google ads or Facebook ads would work. I know like really, really basic stuff. That was like 6 years ago, but I'm sure Dev does a lot of those things really well and has a much deeper understanding. And so when we talk about it, we talk about like the key metrics we want to look at, or how we can improve reaching out to many micropreneurs like yourself when we do recruitment, right? Or other things like demo days. but then like specialists like Dev, who's got a marketing background, can then go in and then take some of those like higher level ideas and then really implement them in a way, and using the tools and the sort of systems that we have. So it's really important that you have that high level understanding of the product, of the HR, of finance, of legal, of these kind of things to be able to operate across that. And to do that, what you really need is a curiosity. So that's another thing. I mean, it's really important as founder, particularly because you're trying to be creative, you are curious by nature, but definitely as a CEO, what you don't want to do is don't want to lose your curiosity and that aptitude for learning, because you're always going to be learning over time. My personal, I guess, way of learning is that I learn by books a lot. Because I feel like people have spent a lot of time in researching and putting things together in a book, and so and that's why like when I've sort of spoken about different resources, you can hear probably like 5 or 6 books that I've talked about already, and there are more that I can tell you about different topics. But that doesn't mean that I've read all of those books in full, right? So no one has the time to do that. So again, there's sort of tips and things that you can sort of follow. Specifically, I'd say one of the things that I used is there's an app called Blinkist, which I found really fantastic. One of my mentors told me about it as well, and that's an app which helps you basically. There's PhD students who get paid to read all these books and then get the key points and summarize them as an audio as well as sort of like key summaries. So you can get the subscription of this sort of product, and then any sort of business book or any kind of different books, there's a lot of books on there that you can listen to, like their summaries or their like read their summaries in like 5 minutes. So if you want, so the way that I do it personally is basically read through or listen some of the summaries about to get the basic concept of the thesis or whatever that particular book is. And then if I'm really interested in some particular book, then I'll also go and buy it and spend the time in actually reading it or understanding it. But it's kind of like triage. If you go to a hospital and you talk to a nurse and they'll tell you you're a serious patient, you go here. You're not very serious, maybe sit here or whatever. It's kind of like that. You should also build a habit of like figuring out a system of learning where you can take inputs really quickly, look at them, and then see what do you actually need, and then basically have that learning muscle to be able to sort of learn that or understand that, so that you have that basic understanding of like running your business. And sometimes deeper understanding in particular, I guess, context. Like for example, if you're doing a clean tech business or a space tech business, you need to understand that industry really well. You need to understand that technology really well. You can't just wing it, or med tech specifically, because you need to understand like clinical trials. You need to understand a lot of those different layers. So it's important to do that, but there's nothing stopping you from going out there and learning that. So that's my, I guess, some higher level tips and ideas around, founders, CEOs. And the last bit that I want to mention is around health. So what will suffer the most when you are building a company, both as a founder and as particularly you're scaling up as a CEO, is your physical and mental health, because you probably won't eat well, you probably won't do as much exercise, and I am guilty of this as well. So I'm not saying that I do it. I try to. But if you can get a support group together of people who can keep you accountable to do these things, that's something that I think is really important. And obviously the other thing to keep in mind is leading by example. So especially when you're a CEO, you've got a team. If your mental health is bad, physical health is bad, that will also have an impact on other members of the team as well. So just keep that in mind, that you are trying to be a role model for the rest of the team as well. And what you do as a founder or as the founding team sets a culture and sets the tone for the rest of the company as well. So yeah, those are, as quickly as I can, some tips and tricks and things like that to think about. I can see that there's a bunch of questions that have come into the chat. But what I'm mindful of is that I want you to go into a bit of breakout rooms, because I feel like that's probably where you can sort of try and absorb this and make sense of this and have a couple of conversations. And then when we come back, we can address these questions as well. So I don't have to run anywhere. And for any of you who want to stay back, we can stay back longer than 7 as well. So I'm not really particularly rushed. But if anyone is, then you can also go early. But for those of you who want to go, I want to make sure that you get a chance to at least download this, talk to each other. So Dev, if you don't mind creating those breakout rooms, how many people do we have? 1, 2, 3.